Hello everyone, Laura K. Buzz here, also known as Laura Kate Dale. You might know me as someone who used to leak information about video games before they were officially announced back in the day. Sometimes accurate to the end results, sometimes not. Some of the accurate leaks I did in the past that people may know me from. I did a video unboxing and review of the slim PlayStation 4 revision about 2 weeks before it was officially announced. I leaked a bunch of information about Until Dawn Rush of Blood, Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. I used to get information a little ahead of when it was officially announced and talk about it, and I don't do that very much anymore, because it's a very stressful thing to do even when you do it correctly. But something I want to talk about that I've never really seen discussed is how leaks sometimes don't end up being accurate to the final product, even if the leaker in question has accurate information at the time they leak things. One of the more stressful things about leaking stuff about video games is that sometimes you will be given ironclad, perfect, accurate, legitimate insider information, and you'll talk about it, and by the time a game comes out, that's no longer accurate, and people will go, "You were bullshitting, you never knew anything." And I want to show off today a concrete example of how someone might get a hold of legitimate early information about a video game, and still, when that final video game comes out, appear to have gotten things wrong. And we have an actual tangible example of this to look at. I'm going to show you something that Nintendo never officially wanted to release, but I think for educational purposes, there is value in me showing you this leaked bit of material and discussing how it compares to the final game that released, and how someone could hypothetically have seen a working build of a Nintendo video game and still appeared to be incorrect in their leaks when the game came out, and try and use that to give you some context for why leaking is sometimes more of an art than a science. So, what you are seeing here is something that leaked as part of the big Nintendo Giga Leak a couple of years ago. This is a 2018 internal development build of Pokémon Sword. Now, this was never a publicly available build, and I know that Nintendo doesn't really like people showing it off very often, but I think that there is very specifically here some educational and critical value in showing this off, because it might give you some insight into how leaks based on accurate real insider information could end up looking incorrect when a game finally releases. You can see from this title screen, 2019 is the listed date because at the time that was the aimed for release date of the game. This was a 2018 build. Now, even just looking at the title screen, there's a few things that a leaker could have, if a leaker had gotten their hands on this build, could have gotten wrong and appeared to not know what they were talking about. First of all, Arceus being a playable Pokemon in the game. Arceus appears there on this list of Pokemon. It's not in the final game, not even when all the DLC is added. Same for Rayquaza. Look at Rayquaza, though. That's Mega Rayquaza. If someone were to get their hands on this development build of the game early and start leaking about it, it would be very fair of them to say Mega Evolutions are going to be returning in Pokemon Sword and Shield, because of course they are. Mega Rayquaza's on the title screen. One might assume that Seasons as a mechanic would be in Pokemon Sword and Shield, because Sawsbuck, I believe it's called, the deer in the back, has different forms based on which season it appears in, and that Pokemon did not appear in Sword and Shield, neither did a Seasons mechanic. And just looking at this title screen, you can already start to see how someone could get a hold of legitimate information about this video game, could have a playable build of it ahead of release, and still, when the game comes out, appear to have been wrong about their leak. Because games change during development, and that is something that is very rarely taken into account by people who are listening to insiders try and leak information. So, here we go. We have Pokemon Sword here, very much clearly playable, pretty close to final looking. I need to work out how to remember how to do this. There is a way for me to have full camera control here. Oh yeah, I can do little emotes while I'm running around with the D-pad, something I don't believe is in the final game. There's a little rotom on the menu, the game menu. That's something I might have gone, hey, that's a game feature. Is it select or start? Oh yeah, there we go. Select. This is just a debug thing, but I can have full camera control, which I can see how a leaker could have, you know, picked up this build of the game and gone, yeah, you're going to have full camera control in this 3D world. That is not the case. Sometimes Pokemon will have little speech bubbles above them. No, they don't in the final game. You have a little Rotom map that, I believe that map is just using placeholder map data from Sun and Moon, I think, in the bottom right corner. But again, Rotom-based minimap could be something that a leaker could talk about that isn't in the game itself. These are all just like really simple examples of things that a person could have had their hands on what is legitimately an early copy of this game, and could have appeared wrong when leaks originally, you know, eventually came out and the game released. And here we are, like, hopping over to a beta version of the wild area, and here's a bunch of Pokemon you can see that don't appear in the final game. There's Ekans, there's an Arbok, I don't believe this little dinosaur appeared in the final game, and these are the kind of things that, like, that's a 3D model that's put in the game enough that it is moving around. I feel like any leaker who had their hands on this build, you know, even if they're not going to trust the images of Mega Rayquaza on the title screen, would go, well, Ekans and Arbok are clearly returning to the game. They're implemented in 3D, you know. This is clearly enough of a thing that, like, someone could have talked about the wild area and talked about, like, you know, talked about the map design from that first area we saw. They might have talked about things like, you know, legendary Pokemon, or mythical Pokemon appearing randomly in the overworld, being size scaled to their size in game. These are the kind of things that you look at and go, yeah, I 100% understand how someone who would, if someone had managed to get their hands on verified playable code of Pokemon Sword and Shield, could have reported on things that would not have been accurate to the final game, right? And, like, going back to the starting area here, this is such a finished area that, like, sometimes you will see people who will complain about leaked game information going, well, some of it was right, but some of it was wrong, and the stuff that was wrong clearly invalidates what was accurate. But, like, let's use this build as an example. If someone had access to this build early, they could have drawn a rough map of the starting area of the game, including roughly what your starting house looks like, what one of the female playable starting characters looks like, the route that goes to your rival's house, Route 1 of the game, down into the first town. Like, they could have mapped out all this stuff. There is a beta version of Wooloo. They could have talked about, hey, there's going to be a sheep Pokemon, but maybe they couldn't have described what it looks like in any great detail because there's only a partial, you know, build of it there. They couldn't have described its evolution, told you what its name was, but they could say, there's a sheep Pokemon. They maybe could have said, there's there's an item to pick up in the first area. They might have described random battles in the grass, taking part in a big arena setting, where there's a big stadium of people watching you. These are all sort of things that a person could have accurately leaked from a in-development build of the game, but might still have looked like they were inaccurately leaking because there are things in here that are placeholders because it's an in-development game, and, like, that's the kind of thing I wish I had more examples to show to explain to people how leaking unfinished game material works, because, look, a lot of the time leakers don't have anywhere near this level of stuff to go on. Usually it's, here is a person I trust who I've been able to verify where they work, who is telling me things secondhand about a game that might only be at this stage in development. But even if you had your hands on a build of the game in 2018, you would have gotten things wrong leaking information about this game, or you would have appeared to be leaking things incorrectly, because there are things in this game and in this build that are not in the final game. And I want people to keep this in mind next time they see someone accurately leak a bunch of information about a game, but a few things, like a handful of things they said in the run-up to that game, end up not being accurate, and go, oh, that person's not a trustworthy leaker. I'll admit, I was completely off the mark a couple of times. There were a couple of times where I reported on stuff that just turned out to not be correct, but there are also times where I very much was in situations like this where I had very concrete proof of things, and things changed later in development, as they sometimes are want to do. So yeah, I just wanted to show this build off and talk about this, because it's important for people to understand why sometimes a leaker that has a rock-solid track record on leaking stuff about games can still get stuff a little wrong, because games are not set in stone, and sometimes very solid-seeming things will change shortly after someone leaks something. Yeah, I hope this has given you a little more insight on the world of video game leaks, because it's not a thing I do anymore, but it was a wild time in my life that I don't think people who haven't been involved in doing it really understand what it can be like sometimes. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments, because God, it was a weird time in my life. I once got a leaked script of an entire Nintendo Direct ahead of it airing, and all I chose to leak from it was the release date of the Switch port of Dark Souls. I could have leaked that entire Direct's running order. It was the one that had Funky Kong on a surfboard coming to Donkey Kong Returns on Switch. That should have been the thing that told me it was fucking real, because that's the kind of thing that no one puts in a fake leak they want taken seriously. Yeah. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Bye.